and welcome to Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast, a podcast in which we capitalise on Ivanka having the same Twitter handle as the daughter of the world's worst man.
Oh, very good.
Who's in town, in my town, not Ivanka's town, but in my town of London today, hence that chant at the start. My name's Michael Forrest.
And I'm Ivanka Magic.
And this week we're going to talk about protesting, dissent, freedom of speech, all that kind of thing. And basically just let's talk about, do we think it's effective? Like, do you ever worry that Donald Trump will listen to this podcast and have us killed?
No.
Okay, well, all right. Well, let's go into it. Let's go into it.
So how was your week, Michael? Are you going to tell me about your week first?
Yeah, all right. I'll tell you, I was in Milan all week. I had a relatively relaxed time. Watched a bit of telly, went to some restaurants. Tried to just give my brain a rest, I suppose. So it's a pretty uneventful week, although I didn't get my payout on my travel insurance.
Oh, no.
Because I hadn't actually left the country when my my passport got stolen, so I don't get no money back for that. So that was an expensive holiday. And I was just thinking, in terms of last week's episode, we talked about self-awareness. We didn't really touch self-consciousness versus self-awareness.
Oh.
So sort of like self-awareness is good, but sometimes that can mutate into self-consciousness, which is sort of if you're too self-conscious. That can be a real suppressing factor, and it's certainly one I've suffered from. So, and even like self-consciousness / narcissism are some things we didn't really touch on, but I don't know if we have to go into great detail on it right now at all. I just thought we hadn't really mentioned it.
This week, to me, I haven't really had much time for reflection on last week's episode, because it's been a roller coaster ride, hasn't it? What with the government sort of having yet another, I don't know, what should we call it? Another little breakdown. Young Boris there throwing his toys out of his cot, resigning in a very distasteful way, really. His letter, he said, "We'll be reduced to a colony." Says, he's just that is just awful. He's just an awful man. And
we want to be the colonists.
Yeah,
I mean, it just shows the delusion of this kind of nationalism, this idea that Britain is some sort of powerhouse of something. It is when it's part of something big.
I don't know if you remember that there was a whole thing where people were calling Ivanka Trump a feckless on Twitter, and I think Boris Johnson sort of embodies that kind of just feckless, lack of responsibility.
Etonian reality distortion field.
Total. He was as the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, was hosting a conference, convention, something on the Western Balkans, an area of the world that I feel a great affinity towards. And, delegates had come from these recently warring states. And the host woke up in the morning and went, "Nah, I don't want to go to work today. I'm going to resign. I think I'll quit today. That's what I'm going to do today." Like,
I'll quit and won't, in a way, like, I feel like if I quit, I make every effort to hand over smoothly and kind of like almost I work harder to quit so that I don't kind of disrupt things too much. He's just like, let it fall in the water. Who cares?
I see our podcast as a protest.
Okay.
Because we are not being quiet. not ignoring, not
Yes.
accepting. We are not accepting, we are not accepting the state of affairs in the world. We may not have found the best and most effective way to respond to the state of the world, but we are actively seeking it out.
Yeah, and I think this is an effective way to keep thinking about it.
Yeah.
So
It's like a very long brainstorming session.
exactly.
A long and drawn out brainstorming session. I see the fact that we on now we have our Podcast Grand Twitter channel thing. We try and put some things on there and links to things and books and things that help keep everybody who follows us, who is interested. We try and, you'll think about, what was it, foraging for truth truffles last week. It's like, here's some things. I think this is a form of protest, but then perhaps we should define protest.
Yeah, I guess it's just making yourself visible and heard in a way that you hope that will be hard to ignore.
Yeah, because you have like there's scales of protest, isn't there? There's like, or there is, there's people that dedicate their whole lives and sacrifice everything to protest an ideal. So you take or protest something and try and change something. So you've got all the big names. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, you've got Emmeline Pankhurst, you've got Millicent Fawcett, you've got people who just dedicate their whole life to changing something. And then there's not everybody can do that, is driven to do that, wants to do that. I mean, what would the world be like if everybody was that driven?
It depends how different their opinions were, I suppose. It's like I guess they're kind of the tip of the iceberg. You'd hope of a lot of people unable to really express why the status quo is so undesirable. What's the word? The status quo is so fucked.
Yeah.
They're unable to talk about it. But then you sort of find someone that. Like eventually someone comes through that can really explain it and talk about it and take action on, rally people, lead.
Because I think I was listening to an episode of The Guilty Feminist this week. I've had a little binge listen to quite a few episodes, and there was one that was an Amnesty International fundraiser supporting blah blah blah. And I mean, Deborah Frances-White is very vociferous on the subject. Obviously of feminism and women's rights, but also refugees.
Yeah.
And listening to her, the episode I was listening to, it was Mothers and Daughters was the episode. And therefore the Me Too, obviously it was Guilty Feminist. So the hashtag Me Too came into conversation. And one of the things that I think makes them it's a protest podcast, a weekly protest podcast, because it's actually very empowering to women, I think, because it makes it easier in your day-to-day to go, no, I'm not, no, you can't talk to me like that. Because, it's like, so given, I think, in that regard, when she's got such a massive audience and she gets, she's completely dedicated, I think that is a form of protest, as well as comedy and art and everything else. But it is a protest. But it's not going on the streets and banging a saucepan. Yeah,
well, and it's more entertaining than straight protests. So people don't just kind of go, oh, this is tiring, I can't be bothered with this.
Yeah,
you need to kind of tart it up a bit.
Yeah.
Choose a gendered.
That's true. See, look, you've become much more conscious. I didn't even pick that up as a gendered. So I'm like, it's
to do with cooking, isn't it?
But also that sort of the sort of marching on the streets type protesting is, for some people, it's quite scary sometimes.
Right.
I've been on, having done my fair share of marches, sometimes you're like, there's a bit of a, frisson of tension coming over from over there. And especially if you go things like May Day marches or student marches, they can So there's something that the nice thing though I'd say about sort of things like this Women's March and the Stop the War March that happened, that was a much more a family event. And the Brexit marches, they're much more sort of like multi-generational, kind of, they're not your, angry protest. And why is that bad? I mean, people, what's wrong with being angry?
It's important to be angry. I mean, isn't that kind of the main emotion? So what I find weird about marching is that I sort of feel weird about when everyone seems to be having fun, because I feel like everyone should be angry. I feel like everyone should be like, "Rah!" But I mean, I guess that's not super productive. The marches I've been on a few, probably not as many as you. I've always felt like, especially when maybe there isn't some, pre kind of all the Brexit and all the real kind of focusing things. Often I've found it weird that you go on a march and it seems like people are marching for all different things.
Well, yeah.
And I just sort of feel like, how can it be effective if you're marching for 57 different causes?
Well, I mean, I saw a tweet from Hugo Rifkin this morning talking about who should he march with, because, it's like some of the march organisers, he doesn't necessarily agree with their policies either. And somebody responded, well, go with the Women's March then, because, that's the most high level cause, even though the sort of different people have different ideas of how to achieve women's equality, or how to protect women from thinking of the variety that Trump espouses. But ultimately, there is a common thread that is broadly acceptable. It's like, did you see the woman, a young woman activist was on the telly with Piers Morgan, and he was just shouting over her in an arrogant, shitty way, and she just turned to him. It's like, don't you get it? I'm a communist, you idiot. And it's like, I may not be a communist, but I will support her women's rights activism and her protesting against Donald Trump. I don't have to we don't have to agree on. I think she was on The Guilty Feminist, that episode where we talked about the fact that they weren't agreeing with each other.
Right.
So hang on a minute, we're all feminists, but there's quite a bit of stuff we don't agree on.
That's the problem, because everyone's a person.
Yeah, it is a big problem. But
it's like, but you're all women.
Yeah, you should all.
Well, you're different. Don't understand. You're all women that think you're people. So why don't you all think exactly the same thing? Like men all think exactly the same thing. So do they do anything?
Protests.
I will start by saying in my local area we recently discovered there's this art studio. They've done a couple of open days, and we were walking around and I found myself in the sort of office of this filmmaker who directed this film that took a long time, called We Are Many, which is all about the anti-war protests back sort of, the Tony Blair era.
Yeah.
Anti-war marches. And I think the takeaway from it was that it did kind of work eventually. But my feeling was always that kind of did nothing. And I sort of feel like that about a lot of the time. You kind of have to turn up. You have to be one of the throng. But then it seems awfully easy to ignore that sort of like good-natured daytime. Maybe people aren't necessarily all on the same page about what they're marching for. It seemed to me like it didn't really work. Even, maybe it did sort of eventually cause a little bit of a sea change, but it didn't stop the war.
No, it didn't. I think there's two sides to protesting, though. One is the need to do something. For example, one of the reasons I went on a Stop the War march, or I go on a Brexit march, is because I want I want, when somebody asks me, where were you on that day? I want to be able to say, oh, well, look, I tried. I did something. I went to march. I was like, that's one of the arguments I had with some people at the time of the stop war. Was like, why are you doing that? I was like, well, when my kid asked me what I was doing when Tony Blair was taking us to war, I want to be able to look him in the eye and say, I went and marched, I protested, I did what I could. I wrote to my MP, I wrote to the Prime Minister. But what can you do, really? What can we do about the fact that Donald Trump is the President of the United States of America and Theresa May is the Prime Minister of the UK? That's what she is right now. That's what he is right now. And all we can really do is register our dissatisfaction with that current status. I mean, what else can you do? You can't, if you really, that's really about as much as you can do. You can prepare, you can help. I spoke to an American this morning. I messaged one of my American friends. I was like, who should I give money to? I can't go on the protest today, so I want to make a donation to an American charity in Trump's name. I was like, is Planned Parenthood the one to choose? She said, yeah, that's a good idea. And then she said, we're really campaigning for a blue wave in November, which would be in America that has flipped to the Democrats.
Okay.
It's because they've got whatever they call them, midterms. Or is that a university term, school term in America? I don't know.
No, midterms.
They have some elections in November. So that's all you can do in this democratic process where, there's an election, some people win, you may or may not agree with that swing. So therefore, you'll either go, yay, rejoice, let's try and make it stay this way, or you go and go, no, I'm not happy about this. I'm going to make sure I'm being loud enough about it so that next time people get a chance to vote, I have done my best to make sure they vote the way I think is right.
There's scales to protesting, so you can sort of march in a positive spirit, and then there's people that espouse like direct action as the only way to really kind of get people's attention, which my understanding is you like break stuff, right?
Well,
well,
I think the suffragettes these days would have been termed terrorists. They used to smash things up.
And then so the next level is, when does it become rioting? And we certainly don't have martyrs for our cause, in this climate. So does that mean things aren't really as bad as they could be, because you haven't really got people that need to die for anything, and it is dying for something actually maybe it doesn't actually help unless you, because this all comes down to the press as well, and because you don't get Theresa May kind of coming out of number 10 going, oh, hello everyone, oh, you seem all very unhappy. That never happens. And I kind of feel like there should be a law that they have to come out and face the crowd, because you're like,
have rotten tomatoes thrown at them.
Well, yeah. Or the press need to, and it seems like a lot of these riots always seem to be quite underreported. Not riots, the
protests,
marches seem to be quite, and that's what you want. I hope Trump sees that video.
I think some people are dying. Like there's that woman, she got somebody ploughed into a crowd of protesters and killed her.
Oh yeah. I mean that's
the stuff that happens that makes it. I spoke last time about being slightly nervous protesting in London now that subjects are it's quite good. I have responsibilities now. I'm not 25 and with no dependents. I think sacrificing your life, I'm sorry to say that I can't do that. I don't that's not, and thankfully I think maybe to some extent you're right that as it stands today there is no need to do that, but I don't know if that's gonna. The current processes that are in place are not the same as they were where you had a ruler, a king, and who could just crack on with things. So you did have to have a revolt because you weren't going to get a chance to vote again.
There's no system.
So there was no system for change, whereas now there is a system for change. Apparently I was reading somewhere that and I must look into this properly, that government has granted itself basically Henry VIII type powers for doing some of this Brexit negotiation, so that they go outside of the democratic process. That I've not seen. I only saw it phrased that way this week.
Ironic.
Well, yeah, it's like
what's going on?
And then I think it's so yeah. I mean that sort of direct action thing. I don't know, because I don't think it gains sympathy from the general population. And actually, what we want is sympathetic, open minds in the general population if we're going to change their minds. If, anti-Brexit protests go through London smashing it up, that fuels the division.
Well, and the alt-right kind of will pounce on anything where they sort of think, oh, look, the left are being violent, the left are doing that. They are really like jumping on that at every opportunity. But, in a very much a double standard, in a way that they don't seem to be jumping on the guy that literally ploughed into people and killed them, like during their kind of alt-right so-called rally, in which, their protests to not take down a
statue.
Racist statue. Like, they're hardly sort of fighting oppression.
No.
It's like they're fighting losing a little bit of ground to fairness and equality. So I saw someone's kind of like pro-Brexit. I saw someone with like 13 points about everything that's wrong with the EU in some sort of Brexit thread. And I just wanted to like read through it. Someone posted this tweet. Brexit is such a shit idea that everyone associated with it keeps quitting, and then when they realise how fucked we are, just so they can't be blamed for how shit it'll be. How about we sod it off instead of holding a nation hostage because a third of the population got tricked by a bus? Which is, a fun tweet. And then this guy, so much populist, so much neoliberalism, so much sycophancy in this fake narrative. 1, it wasn't a third of the population. 2, the idea that Leave voters are all stupid and were tricked by a bus is neoliberal propaganda. 3, the euro has been a disaster for everyone except Germany and France. This doesn't sound right. All the great socialists in this country have been harsh critics of the EU since its conception. Okay, I guess you're defining great socialists as something I don't understand. There's 16 points.
Right.
5, the EU actively fights against democratic reform and is very right-wing. Like, how do you argue with that? It's like, isn't it implicitly... What does right wing mean to you then, if you can say that?
Right, yeah.
6, the EU likes to let migrants drown in the sea and privileges white Europeans over other refugees and immigrants. So they're sort of like, this guy's sort of like, oh, the EU is actually the racist one and the one that's what?
Yeah.
Like, EU supports censorship, heavy copyright laws, and centralising power into institutions run by unaccountable and unelected bankers and plutocrats. It's so like tangled in on itself at this point. Like, what is this? But how do you even start to... EU supports Spanish nationalists over Catalan leftists. EU harbours right-wing anti-immigrant populists and allows them to gain popularity by actively persecuting the left. 10, the EU is a corporate lobbying club moving to the right to pander to anti-immigration rhetoric. Is it? 11, the EU is against nationalisation and is full of Tories. 12, the EU is pro-austerity and as a form of punishment in the bloc. EU fucked Greece and Italy big time, apparently. The narrative that the vote to leave is purely a right-wing phenomenon is propaganda. But wait a minute, I thought you said... What is right wing? You're against it, you're for it, I don't know.
Well,
and then finally, then the narrative that idiots voted is classist and based on a sense of middle class entitlement, whatever. The leader of the Labour Party, that's probably the fairest one. The leader of the Labour Party has been anti-EU his whole life, but has been forced into a weak position where he will be unable to push for democratic reform in the EU because the narrative has been taken over by centre-right Blairites and liberal imperialists who can't stop screeching about voters that they have a false perception about that is based on pseudo-intellectual middle-class exceptionalism. What could have been a great opportunity to push for reform and help socialism take hold again in the EU has been ruined by allowing the right wing to have a complete ownership of the narrative. What is going on with this person's perception? I don't understand.
there is this underlying neoliberal being, by definition, sort of capitalist thread in the things like the free movement of people, because that increases competition and drive down jobs. But I don't know that the rest of it is true. I mean, Germany let in 1 million refugees in one go. How is this now the EU being... And yes, Tony Benn, being a big old socialist, British socialist, was always a critic of the EU. I don't know that criticism is necessarily a throw it away campaign. I think to be critical of anything is right.
We all have our criticisms of the EU. I think cookie warnings are stupid. I don't think we should fuck it off.
I think GDPR is a bit of a cack-handed implementation of a thing. But then, I'm not a lawyer. I've got but it's like there's quite a few things where you're like, really? But if you're trying to get 500 million people in 27 countries to sort of club together to do something, I don't think that's easy.
No, of course not.
And there's going to be some fuck-ups along the way, and there's going to be some progress. I don't believe that throwing away these institutions is the way forward. I mean, there's been quite a lot of criticism of the UN as well recently. It's like, and that is not a flawless institution, but it was founded off the back of 2 world wars.
Yeah,
like there has to be some kind of reaction to, hang on a minute. We've had 2 world wars in the last 20 years. We need to do something. Right, let's all form a club where we agree we're going to talk about stuff before we start punching each other in the face. It's like...
People complain about institutions, but there's a very real way in which having a Hobbes Leviathan, having some higher power thing in authority that does help mitigate a lot of the human behaviours that emerge when you kind of resort to tribalism and things like that. When people take the law into their own hands, when people, kind of foster grudges against people over there's a lot of stuff that people will do if they have, they think they need a gun to protect themselves from something. Like, there's a lot of not very nice human behaviours that, unfortunately, like the grand overarching umbrella is a really effective way of raising everybody's quality of life by kind of like taking away a lot of the need to do those things. If you grant the state the exclusive right to violence, that does kind of... I don't really want to go back from that, which is kind of the opposite of that sort of libertarian ideals that are driving a lot of this sort of change at the moment. Like, you don't... maybe it's not perfect, but you don't want to go back to that world where people take matters into their own hands all the time, because that's fucked.
No. I mean, I think there's a couple of things at play here. One is, this guy sounds like whoever, I'm assuming it's a guy, commenting based on... sort of from a leftist standpoint to some extent.
Like, ostensibly.
And there's one of the things that happened leading up to the referendum vote that I told you I sort of ended up arguing with somebody online who is, an art graduate, creative, digital type, and he was really hooked on sovereignty and really pushing for a leave vote. And I kept trying to argue with him, and so did somebody else we used to work with who is of British Chinese descent. And I got this other friend on. I was like, what's going on? Why is he voting leave? Why does he want to stand shoulder to shoulder with racists? And he said, well, he's never experienced discrimination. He doesn't understand what it's like to have somebody make a racial slur or a slur based on your gender or something like that. It was like, that's his problem. And I think there is a bit of post-referendum. I know a number of socialists who voted leave, and I ended up talking about another one of them with somebody else. I was like, I don't understand. He's a clever guy. Why would he vote leave? And he, all it's done, one of the biggest things it's done is given permission to racists. And the person I was discussing it with is like, I don't think he understands who his friends are. And, you know, what we were talking about at the beginning of this, about the sort of hierarchy of things, is there is a hierarchy. And yes, I want to fix the world so everybody has at least a living wage, not a minimum wage, and everybody has access to education, and everybody has access to food and water and all the things they need to flourish. But we have to start somewhere. Racism is on the bottom layer of this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So is discrimination against women. So is being anti-choice. So is being all these things at the bottom. It's like there's some shit that needs sorting out, below which we mustn't allow ourselves to fall. And that's the thing that I don't get.
Yeah, I think people forget. It's easy to forget what you have. It's easy to sort of, I mean, you call it taking it for granted, but it's easy to kind of mistake. I don't know, I'm thinking of it in terms of moving jobs or kind of quitting a job. You can sort of forget when you're trying to imagine an alternative situation. Sometimes you can forget that the money is doing something, or that you know you've got certain freedoms that, you know, I'm like, this job is not letting me be creative, and then I'm like, I haven't got the money to buy records to sell. Like, it's just this kind of, it's hard to imagine yourself. It's hard to remember the things, those routine things. Right, it's hard to remember the absence of people shouting racist stuff at you every day. Like, it's hard to remember the absence of money when you have a bit of money. Yeah, we're just not very good at imagining what it's going to be like if you take away those things that we take for granted right now. And maybe, you know, and you think, maybe there's a couple of times that liberalism makes me uncomfortable, or maybe it's going a bit far. Let's throw it all away. Maybe the EU's being a bit annoying about something. Let's throw the whole lot away, because we've forgotten that before we had that, it was a pain in the arse to drive somewhere.
There's a couple, like, to go on holiday. There's also buy or sell stuff, but I mean, there are a couple of threads in this. One, you know, you could have a whole debate of what if we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of need, food and shelter are the basic needs. And I've just listed out, you know, we need to fight racism, we need to do all this. And I'm like, well, actually, you can't, you know, whilst people are being racist and while they are discriminating, they don't want to help other people because they somehow program them into their head as being lesser in some way.
Well, I mean,
and, you know, there's that sort of, which is why I think this kind of equality thing is so important. But also this sort of, because it's kind of like we're having two conversations at the same time, but it's like this sort of throwing things away. It's the same thing with the way Britain represented the referendum and the way the Brexiteers have approached it. They have no plan. There is no plan.
Yeah, they haven't attempted to imagine what this alternative looks like.
They've just gone, I don't want to play with you anymore, and I'm going home. Oh, I've got no one to play with now. Mummy. You know, it's like, it's just so unspeakably irresponsible that they would, it's like, you know, in my 20s, I have walked into work and go, fuck this, I don't want it anymore, resign.
Yeah.
But so what? The only person that's going to be hungry is me.
Yeah.
Now, as a grown-up, I have to discuss these things with my husband and go, darling, I don't really like this job at the moment. What can we do? You know, it's like, well, let's save up some money and then you can, you know, it's like, and then for somebody running a country to go, let's just see what happens. You fucking selfish arseholes.
There was a very good Seinfeld thing I saw a couple of days ago. He says, people who have just eaten Why do you give the bill to the people who've already eaten, who can't imagine what it's like to be hungry? They're like, what is this? Why am I paying for all this food? They can never imagine being. Everyone's mystified by the bill because they can't imagine what it's like to be hungry anymore. And it's sort of like that. It's that same thing. Like you just can't really imagine what it's like to not have these things. So you just kind of go, well, what is this? What is this? This is very distasteful. This bill we're being given. Something I think it seems like Trump would like it to be more like China or North Korea. Definitely, he'd like to be able to point guns at protesters. He'd like to be able to point, he'd like to be able to use state violence against its citizens, which is obviously if the state represents citizens, then there is no more anti-democratic sentiment than that.
No.
But, China has just, the sort of maybe was all right kind of, I don't know, what's his name? Who's just kind of like regressed a lot of kind of systems so he can just stay in power indefinitely now. And it's forever. You just really hope that the American... I mean, it's because it's a relatively recently conceived system, you'd hope it would be a little bit more capable of kind of fighting off one dictator. But yeah, like we can protest because the police will protect us because they're working for us. And we said this before, but like, and I think actually, like, I don't think Theresa May wants like some sort of autocratic kind of like fascist power the way Trump does. No. But like the trouble is there's this escalation. The citizens have guns, so the police have to have more guns, and like everyone's kind of on a trigger of like resorting to violence in a way that we're very lucky not to have to fear too much. Although it is pretty heartbreaking that the sort of like inflated fear of terrorism now means that you do see police with huge guns on a fairly regular basis in London now, and you just think, well, that can't ever lead to anything good, can it? Like, sticks are fine, surely. Like, big clubs should be enough for our society.
Yeah.
Although, kettling is that whole thing, isn't it? That police do now. So it's... Yeah. They just corner them and... Yeah,
and trap them until they such a point where they, like, need to go to the loo, get hungry, thirsty, want to go home, and then they all go home.
Right, yes.
That's the idea.
They don't beat the shit out of them. They just, like, corner them. Yeah.
I think it was invented for the suffragettes.
Right.
It's like, right, we'll teach those women. With their heavy ovaries, preventing them from thinking.
Yay.
That was apparently one of the arguments given for why women shouldn't be given a vote.
Yeah, there's a lot of that shit, isn't there? There's always been this, If I can, like, summarise my issues with, like, modern protests that are maybe not too focused, is that a protest that is just expressing dissatisfaction with the status quo doesn't seem like enough to me, because you can't define something by what it is not. I want not this, and as we've already talked about, like, I want not the EU. Well, what do you want? So I just think it's really, really important that if you're protesting, that you have a vision of a better alternative that you are promoting, rather than just saying, I don't like this. I think that doesn't, there's a reason that doesn't do much. It's because you're not, what are you supposed to do about that? Just, okay, I won't, look, well, you need to find out what needs to change and be promoting that, don't you? Like, what do you reckon?
Well, yeah, I think that having a clear goal is quite but I don't think people, like, I don't know if what's made you think, is that a general comment or is that about protesting Trump's visit?
No, I mean, it's fun to go, fuck you, Donald Trump, but what does it accomplish? It makes him feel bad. Good. He should feel bad. Does it make him question his behaviour? I don't know if anything can. So what are we doing? Like, other than giving fuel to right-wing media to say, look how childish the left are being. And it also comes from this kind of discomfort with seeing a lot of people kind of like they've all got their own little kind of pet peeve, and they're all sort of they're all doing their own thing in these. In not maybe so much now. There's a lot more focus on what we're kind of angry about. But I do find, like I want to protest, but like saying I want not this is not enough, is it?
No, I think the part of the problem is that the not this is the progress we already have. So how do you stop?
If not this is, I don't want women to be paid less than men. I don't want to be beaten up. I don't want to be killed. I don't want to be... Yeah, that's pretty easy to... That's a pretty clear brief from your people. All right? But it's a lot harder as you get up that hierarchy. Like, it's easier to talk about the stuff that's lower down the pyramid because it's clear, whereas as we try and progress beyond that, it's much harder to talk about what we want. Like, how are we going to do universal basic income? That's a difficult problem to solve. So everyone just kind of regresses to talking about, well, maybe abortions. I'm anti-abortion. I'm anti-women. I'm anti-brown people. Like, instead, because it's just an easier conversation to have.
Yeah, I think it's going and shouting on the street is not the only form of protest. So is what we haven't talked about, things like not buying things, not going things. You've got Stop Funding Hate T-shirt on. It's like
the most ineffectual protest in the world because I'm not shopping at John Lewis, but I haven't really told them. So all that's happening is I'm not getting to go to John Lewis because I've said to lots of people that I'm not going to John Lewis.
But you're still not giving them money. I think not giving people money is active. Yeah, it's like, why have I...
But they have to know why.
Well, I'm sure they do know why.
I don't think they know why I'm not giving them money.
Yeah, but you're like one of many. And I think the whole thing, this is the same thing with the plastic thing. There is nothing wrong with you simply avoiding to go because you are not going to be the only one of you. You're not going to be the only one saying no to a plastic straw in a bar. You're not going to be... And it does make a difference, I think. And if anything else, it makes you feel better. You're doing something. There is a bit of making yourself feel better when you're helpless. I think that, though, of the many problems with Donald Trump is that he's taken the conversation back down to a base level. And maybe we need to go there because we haven't done our homework. We're not done. We have elected a man who said that he just grabs women by the pussy. I mean, come on. It's like, that's it. Yeah, like, we're not done. We're not done with these basics at the bottom.
Yeah, we don't. We apparently there are still lots of people that still have failed to grasp.
No, all you wonderful socialists out there that voted against the EU or for us to leave the EU out of some highfalutin reasons, full power to you, but there is some shit that needs sorting out that's still not sorted out, that cannot be sorted out if we do this kind of like distracting ourselves with Brexit bullshit while we've got a country full of racist, bigot, misogynist tossers. It's like we need to, we're not done. Reading that book, that Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, my goodness, that is such an eye-opener for like how recently in British history we had, and I can't think of a single example now, but you just turn pages going, no, because I forgot, and I think I'm reasonably woke, as the saying goes, and got educated by parents and grandparents who were against this shit a long time ago. And you read in the book and you go, oh my God, I didn't realise. Really? 1989? It's like... Yeah,
like when I was at school, there was a lot of racist...
I mean, I do remember the riots in Birmingham because, the early 80s. I was a bit old enough to understand that some people had been rioting. I don't think I was old enough to understand the nuances, but I understood that it was to do with... the brown people, the Indians, the Pakistanis, something. That's how my childish remembrance of it. Yeah. But I think that book just brings it all home. It's like, no, this is very recent. No, this is very recent. No, it's like, oh, so. But we're not done.
Yeah. So yeah, like I guess I will backtrack on my protesting clarity thing because I think not not war is a very clear brief. I think, not Trump is a difficult thing because,
Because it's not really just not Trump. It's not all the other things you listed.
It's not everything he stands for.
He stands for all these things.
Donald, who hurt you? Talk to me.
Who made you this way?
Talk to me, Donald. I really do want to know why you're such a cunt. Just talk to me. What did your father say to you that made you this way?
There's a baby, if there ever was, that was left to cry and not picked up for cuddles. Thank you for listening to Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast. You can find us in all the usual places, and it would be marvellous if you could tell your friends to look for us and subscribe too. The easiest way is grandpodcast.com, and then there's a subscribe button.
Do hit that subscribe button. It does do something, and I've tried to make it as easy as possible with the programming. You can email us hello@grandpodcast.com too, if you want to invite us on a march.
Give us some feedback, teach us some things.
Where can people find you, Ivanka?
Mostly at Ivanka on Twitter.
You can find me at michaelforestmusic.com. And yeah, just tell your friends, everyone. And basically, that's it for the week.
That's it.
Basically, we're pro-protest, I suppose.
We are. We're pro-protest.
Bye!
Bye. Bye, bye, bye.
Goodbye. See ya.